firm Berlin Rosen, with which you were very close, especially their principal, Jonathan Rosen. By way of background for our listeners, New York One and the New York Post went to court and won release of these emails after you had claimed that the emails should be kept confidential, as if between you and city officials, because the consultants were in effect agents of the city. Now, much of the coverage of the emails so far has been about attitudes toward the news media that you express. We know that you've publicly called the New York Post a right-wing rag and at least once refused to answer questions from a Post reporter because you didn't like a previous story. But I want to ask about the mainstream, not right-wing media. After you didn't like a profile in The Atlantic, you wrote, "I strongly advise we avoid profiles from now on, especially from national publications. I have no use for these people. Let's just do the work and go right around the so-called referees," unquote. And on the New York Times, after criticizing a specific Times story as biased, you wrote in a general way, "What did I say about how disappointing the Times has become? And we need to figure out a new paradigm with the Times. This level of bias can't be ignored. Either starve them or reason with them or something else," unquote. So my first question is, do you think not just the Post and Daily News, but the New York Times is biased against you in a general way?
I think there's a problem with mainstream media. I mean, I'll get to the specific, but I think the broad point is there's a problem with mainstream media. I have felt this my whole life. This is not new to my role as mayor. We have a corporate media. It is based on a free enterprise model. It's based on selling things. I don't think that's healthy. I think that leads to a lot of distortions. I am a big fan of public radio and public TV. I'm a big fan of alternative media and subscription-based media like The Guardian that are trying to take some of the bias out of the equation that is based, that comes from needing clicks and having a mentality that connects to a corporate structure. So, I felt this my whole life. The bottom line is I think we need and deserve much better. And when I wrote those things, look, the whole underlying reality here is the legal guidance I had received from the City Hall staff was that those particular interactions with trusted advisors were something we could do frankly and would not be publicly disclosable and did not have to be publicly disclosable. Obviously, that was a mistake, and if we had known that, we wouldn't have put those things into email. The kind of conversations that bluntly everyone has all the time in public life. But I don't think the coverage has reflected the work we're doing or the impact it's having on the people of the city. And, Brian, you and I have talked about this on air. I think there's a disconnect. I think, we have 8.6 million people who really, really care about what affects their lives, their schools, jobs, quality of life in their community. But a lot of the coverage is always personalities and sensationalization, and I think distortion of a lot of what's really happening. And I'm comfortable saying I don't think that's the best we can be, and I'm not going to simply accept that.
But you lump the Times and the Atlantic in with the tabloids and those characteristics?
No, each one's different. I think the tabloid culture, and I've said it very publicly, I think has been harmful to New York City. It sensationalizes and often divides us, and it has for a long, long time, and the Post is the leading edge of that. But, no, I have a critique of the Times, too. I don't think, I've said this publicly also, I don't think they focus enough on the city they're based in. I'd like to see more coverage that talks about the grassroots. I think there's obviously an elite orientation at the Times. That's not a news flash. It's not my cup of tea. That's a problem. But, I think in general, the worldview is not from the grassroots up, and that's part of my critique. Just when we started this broadcast or this interview, change comes from the grassroots. I'd like to see a whole lot more coverage focus on the grassroots. I'd like to see a lot more coverage of the things we're doing and what it means for everyday people, and I'm always, I hate to say always, often disappointed that we don't see that.
The Daily News today compares you to Trump in your general disdain for the press, such as when you wrote in one of the emails, "The news media is pitiful and it's sad for our city and nation," unquote. So do you think that you and Donald Trump are being subjected to similar forces of sensationalism in the media?
That's a ridiculous simplification, and I think it kind of is the case in point. Donald Trump and I are about the most polar opposite people in the world. He's a billionaire who is trying to increase the power of the wealthy and is in so many ways a negative, divisive figure. He has been for decades. And his approach is a systematic effort to undermine our institutions. He's trying to undermine the free press. He's trying to undermine our law enforcement institutions. He's trying to undermine democracy. It's quite plain. I have a critique of the corporate media, and I have a critique of the tabloid culture. They're entirely different realities. Donald Trump was created by the tabloid culture. I mean, let's be real about this. And there's been some great reporting, by the way. I want to give credit where credit is due. A great piece in New York Magazine, for example, by Mark Harris a few months back that got to the essence of how Donald Trump was a creature and a creation of the tabloid culture. No, there's no comparison whatsoever here, and I just find it amazing that that's the best that people can come up with.
In one email, you're speculating about market forces in the newspaper industry, and you wonder if the Post might go out of business, and you call that wishful thinking. Maybe that was just a joke, but would you really like to see the main opposition paper in the city go under?
I'll tell you what I feel. I believe the Post is not only right-wing, not only distorts the facts on a regular basis, but is divisive. And I'm shocked. I'm shocked that more people don't come out and say it, because it used to be a commonplace thing to talk about not so many years ago in New York City. And just look at the headlines every day and look at the dog whistling that goes on in the New York Post all the time. Come on. No, I will not shed a tear if that newspaper is no longer here, because I think we need a better civic discourse. There's more and more media than ever. This is a really good thing. There's more alternative media. There's more outlets than we've ever had, or we have had in a long, long time because of social media. There's plenty of tough reporting, plenty of insightful reporting, plenty of questioning of authority. But come on, the Post is not like everyone else, and I think we should just stop the charade. Their presence in our society, unfortunately, is harmful.
And finally on this, on your relationship with Berlin Rosen, you wanted these emails to be kept secret from the public because you said they were acting